The Galactic Empire was a monolith of ambition, its reach stretching across countless star systems, unchallenged and unrelenting. Driven by an insatiable hunger for resources and control, its fleet swept through distant worlds like steel hurricanes, leaving subdued planets and broken peoples in their wake. For the officers steering this vast machine of conquest, individual lives were incidental, minor obstacles in the face of a greater destiny. It was on the unassuming planet of Caelorus VII, a remote, mist-shrouded world overlooked by 3 crimson moons, that the Empire encountered its unwitting undoing. Among the rolling hills and shadowed forests, an old man lived in solitude, his modest home nestled between ancient, towering trees. Though his age bent his back and softened his voice, his gaze held an intensity that seemed to pierce even the densest darkness. Villagers spoke of him in hushed whispers, referring to him only as the Keeper, a protector of something too sacred or perhaps too dangerous to name aloud. The old man's connection to the villagers was understated but undeniable. Children would leave small flowers outside his home, their mothers offering quiet prayers for his well-being. None knew the true breadth of the burden he carried, but all agreed on one thing. The old man, despite his humble appearance, was not ordinary. The truth, however, was far more extraordinary than they could imagine. For centuries, he had served as a silent guardian, entrusted with secrets that predated their recorded history, secrets tied to his only son. The son, absent for years, was a figure of both mystery and legend. Those few who had seen him described a tall, dark man who moved like a shadow and seemed more myth than mortal. Rumors swirled that he was cursed, a being neither fully alive nor entirely dead, bound to a fate too horrible for ordinary minds to comprehend. The old man rarely spoke of him, and when he did, it was with a strange mixture of love and regret. The Galactic Empire arrived like a storm without warning, their landing craft splitting the skies with deafening roars. What brought them to Caelorus VII was unclear. Perhaps whispers of untapped resources or tales of a lone dissident hiding among the trees. What mattered was their swift and brutal methodology. Containment first, questions later. Imperial soldiers, clad in black armor and brandishing plasma rifles, marched through villages, their mere presence enough to turn cheer to silence. When word reached the old man that the Empire was searching for unregulated forces, his weathered hands clenched tight. He had prepared for this, though he had hoped it would never come. The confrontation was as inevitable as it was tragic. The old man refused to flee, even as the villagers begged him to save himself. "If I leave," he told them, his voice calm yet unwavering, "they will not stop. It is my duty." That evening, when the Empire's soldiers approached his home, their arrogance was evident in their swagger. To them, he was just an eccentric hermit. They laughed as they demanded his compliance, mocking the old man's defiance. But their amusement turned to alarm when his simple words broke the night's quiet. "If you take my life," he said, a glint of something ancient in his eyes, "you will awaken a curse you cannot fathom." The soldiers were unshaken. Warnings were common in their line of work, rhetoric to distract and stall. The squad leader barked an order, and within seconds, a blaster shot cut through the night. The old man fell to the ground, his breath escaping in a shallow gasp. The soldiers hesitated only briefly before radioing the incident to their superiors. What harm could one old man truly cause? In his final moments, the old man reached out weakly, his hand brushing the base of an old, weathered symbol carved into the side of his home. His lips moved in a barely audible whisper. "Forgive me, my son." The Empire left the scene without a second thought, oblivious to the storm they had just unleashed. In the silence that followed, the moonlight bathed the forest in crimson, as if the heavens themselves mourned the loss of the Keeper. Unbeknownst to the soldiers, far beyond the trees, a dark force stirred. In a forgotten cave hidden deep in the hills, the son, a recluse by nature, felt the severing of a bond he had never truly understood until now. His slumber was interrupted by a rush of grief, anger, and something darker, a hunger that had long remained dormant. The stage was set, the pieces in motion. The Empire believed the old man was but another inconsequential casualty of war, blind to the fact that his death was no ordinary act of violence. Somewhere in the dark, his son awoke with eyes that glowed faintly red, the curse now unshackled. What came next would be a reckoning, in the shadowy depths of Caelorus VII's forest, far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Empire. The sun stirred from his long isolation. Time had passed like a slow, dreadful current in his secluded cave, each moment weighted by his curse, a condition not of his choosing, yet inseparable from his very existence. For years, he had resisted its pull, relying on ancient practices passed down by his father to temper his monstrous hunger. Now, the fragile barriers of self-control began to fracture. News of his father's death did not arrive by conventional means. There was no word of mouth, no messengers, no villagers brave enough to approach the cave. It came instead as a rending pain deep in the son's chest, a sensation unlike any other, both physical and spiritual. He fell to his knees as images of his father, his weathered hands, soft but determined voice, and the sharp gaze that had always seemed unshakable, rushed into his mind unbidden. This wasn't grief in its ordinary form. No, this was a rupture in a bond older and more profound than simple blood ties. Something sacred had been broken. Through this anguish, another sensation began to rise. Fury. It was a relentless wave crashing through the fog of his sorrow, sharpening his thoughts and steeling his resolve. His father was gone, and with his death, the fragile promise of peace between the son and his darker instincts seemed to crumble. At the heart of this maelstrom was a single name burned into his mind: the Empire. The son, though solitary by nature, was no stranger to the galaxy's politics. He had studied the stories his father told him of distant wars, oppressive regimes, and civilizations extinguished under the banner of imperial ambition. He knew the Empire's hubris and the vastness of their resources. Yet, in this moment, none of it mattered. All that remained was the knowledge that they had taken something irreplaceable from him, and for this, they would pay. Pushing himself upright, the son moved deeper into his cave, his steps quickening with purpose. The air seemed to shift around him, thick with an ancient energy that resonated with his awakening anger. At the rear of the cave, he knelt before an altar carved with cryptic symbols. His father had made this place, not as a sanctuary, but as a reminder of the line they had walked for centuries, a line between restraint and ruin. On the altar rested a single object, a family heirloom cloaked in a cloth of black velvet. With a steady hand, he unveiled it. The relic was a blade, forged in a bygone era and polished to a mirror-like sheen. Its hilt bore the intricate engraving of a beast's open maw, a nod to the legacy of vampirism his family had endured for generations. His father had always told him the blade was both a weapon and a promise. Should the day ever come when their family was attacked, it would be his duty to use it. "Father, I will honor you," he murmured, his voice low but steady. Gripping the hilt, he felt a surge of power course through him. The blade amplified his latent abilities, awakening dormant instincts that had slumbered for far too long. Within hours, the transformation began. His pale skin, once merely ghostly, took on an ethereal glow under the light of the planet's crimson moons. His dark hair seemed to shimmer, moving faintly as though alive. But the most striking change was in his eyes. They now glowed a piercing red, bright as blood, betraying the predatory power that churned beneath his composed exterior. Despite his ferocious hunger, he refrained from indulging his thirst. His vengeance required clarity, not reckless abandon. The Empire's forces had made their temporary base near the village, a hub of armored transports, weapon caches, and garrison soldiers. From the sun's vantage point on the cliffs, their arrogance was evident. Fires blazed at their encampment as soldiers feasted, laughing into the night without a care for the world they had disrupted. As he watched, he planned. Unlike the soldiers who had struck down his father, the son operated with precision, every move calculated. His rage did not blind him. It honed him, granting him focus sharper than the blade in his hand. The first strike came just before dawn. He moved silently through the camp, a shadow that slipped past guards and into the heart of the garrison. One by one, he claimed his prey, his speed and ferocity too overwhelming for their blasters. Yet he did not take the lives of the innocent. The villagers and prisoners who had been caught in the Empire's web were spared. His rage was reserved solely for those who had raised their weapons against his father. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, the once boisterous camp lay in ruins. Plasma burns scorched the ground, tents smoldered in heaps of ash, and only silence remained. The soldiers who had mocked his father's defiance were no more, their ranks decimated by a force they could neither comprehend nor resist. Standing amidst the destruction, the sun turned his gaze skyward. The Galactic Empire, vast and sprawling, would undoubtedly respond. Yet for the first time in centuries, he did not hide. His transformation was complete. He was no longer a reluctant heir to his family's dark legacy. He was vengeance incarnate, a force that would not rest until the Empire had felt the full weight of what they had unleashed. The villagers who had once whispered of his existence now watched from the forest's edge, a mixture of awe and terror reflected in their eyes. To them, he was no longer the keeper's son. He was something else, something more, a harbinger of reckoning. As he disappeared into the trees, one thing was clear. His path of vengeance had only just begun. High above the forested expanse of Caelorus VII, a fleet of Imperial warships descended like looming specters, their angular forms slicing through the blood-red dawn. News of the annihilated outpost had reached command faster than expected. While the Galactic Empire was vast and accustomed to rebellion, reports of supernatural carnage, speed impossible to track, wounds unexplained by conventional weaponry, were unusual enough to demand swift action. At the heart of this fleet was a battlecruiser, its cold, metal heart pulsing with troops, firepower, and a singular certainty. Vengeance would be met with obliteration. On the planet's surface, the sun awaited their arrival. Standing atop the jagged cliffs overlooking the forest, he gazed skyward. The crimson glow of his eyes dimmed but did not fade, like coals smoldering beneath ash. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. His father's memories still lingered, anchoring him to purpose, while his curse granted him the weapons he now wielded with terrifying precision. The Empire, bloated with its false sense of invulnerability, had killed a man it deemed insignificant. Now, they would learn the folly of underestimating what they did not understand. As the first dropships descended into the forest, their stabilizers kicking up clouds of dust and debris, the sun began his approach. He moved with purpose, his stride silent yet determined, the ancient blade in his hand catching the first rays of morning light. Inside his mind, his resolve solidified. This was not a battle for survival. It was a reckoning. The Empire wasted no time. Troopers poured into the forest, clad in heavy black armor, their movements orchestrated with mechanical precision. Orders echoed over the crackle of comms. Search, suppress, destroy. They had come to extinguish what they considered a mere nuisance, a disruption in the grand machinery of their empire. They believed their might, measured in sheer numbers and technological prowess, made them untouchable. The sun's first strike came from the shadows. As a squad of soldiers moved cautiously through the dense foliage, their scanners unable to penetrate the thick canopy above, a sudden blur descended upon them. It moved faster than they could process. A flash of silver sliced through the air, followed by a crimson mist that painted the forest floor. Before their bodies hit the ground, the sun was already gone, slipping back into the darkness like a phantom. Panic rippled through the Imperial ranks. Reports came in disjointed fragments. Ambushes from nowhere, a figure that seemed to vanish with the wind, soldiers drained of life. Despite their advanced equipment, the troopers found themselves at the mercy of an enemy who moved with the primal precision of a predator and the calculated fury of a man wronged. As the forest echoed with screams and the hiss of plasma bolts, the Empire deployed reinforcements. Walkers thundered through the terrain, their towering frames flattening trees in their path. Gunships hovered low, strafing the underbrush with blistering fire. Yet the sun remained untouchable. His speed was not of this world, his strength unyielding. He leapt onto a walker, tearing into its armored hull with his blade before driving it deep into its power core. The ensuing explosion lit up the forest, sending debris raining down like meteor showers. Above the chaos, the Imperial commander observed from the safety of his battlecruiser, his expression darkening with each passing minute. "Deploy the Omega contingent," he barked, his voice tinged with frustration. The Empire had faced countless insurgencies, but this was something different. This enemy wasn't just resisting. It was systematically dismantling their forces with cold, calculated rage. When the Omega contingent landed, the sun paused for the first time. These were no ordinary troopers. They were elite, armored in experimental suits designed to enhance speed, strength, and reflexes. Armed with weaponry capable of disrupting even supernatural forces, they spread out like hunters chasing their prey. The clash between the sun and the Omega contingent was nothing short of catastrophic. Plasma rounds scorched the earth around him, their heat singeing even his supernatural skin. But where the soldiers relied on technology, the sun relied on centuries of instinct. His movements were poetry in motion, dodging, weaving, and striking with precision. He wielded the blade as an extension of himself, cutting through their enhanced armor as though it were paper. By the time the battle ended, the forest was a scarred wasteland. Fires burned unchecked, thick smoke curling into the dawn sky. Bodies, both Imperial and local, littered the ground. The sun stood amidst the carnage, his breath steady, his blade dripping with the blood of his enemies. As silence settled over the battlefield, a deep hum filled the air, a sign of the battlecruiser preparing for one final act. High above, the commander ordered an orbital bombardment, determined to leave no trace of this force of destruction. For a moment, the sun simply stared upward, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deliberate motion, he raised his blade, its point reflecting the glow of the rising sun. And then he disappeared. When the battlecruiser's cannons fired, obliterating the forest and everything within it, there was no sign of the sun. The villagers who had watched from afar assumed him dead, consumed in the Empire's fury. But whispers began to spread. Tales of a shadow moving through the trees, of crimson eyes watching from the dark. The Empire claimed victory, declaring Caelorus VII a pacified zone in its reports. Yet, in their hearts, they knew the truth. They had faced something beyond their comprehension, and though they had unleashed their full might, it felt hollow. Deep within the black recesses of space, there was fear, a lingering sense that this was not the end. For the sun, death was never an end but a transformation. Somewhere in the endless night, he prepared for the next chapter of his vengeance. The Empire, bloated with its power, had no idea what awaited in the shadows. The reckoning was far from over.